20 years had passed. The little children who once ran around their grandparents' house were now adults. Daniel's son, David, was married and had a young daughter. Michael's daughter, Grace, had built a career and was raising 2 children. Sarah's daughter, Emma, had also started her own family. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but every family has struggles that nobody sees. One evening, David came home from work exhausted. His wife, Anna, was waiting for him. Anna said, "David, we need to talk." David put down his bag. He asked, "About what?" Anna looked worried. She said, "You're always working. You're here, but you're not really with us." David became defensive. He said, "I'm working for this family." Anna shook her head. She said, "I know, but our daughter doesn't need only the things you buy. She needs her father." David became silent. Those words hit him hard. That night, David sat alone. He remembered something his father, Daniel, had told him years earlier. "Being present is more important than being perfect," Daniel had said. David looked toward his daughter's bedroom. He realized he was beginning to repeat a different part of the cycle. His father had been afraid of abandoning his children. Now David was becoming so focused on providing that he was slowly becoming emotionally absent. The next morning, David sat beside his daughter. He said, "Daddy needs to tell you something." David said, "I'm sorry that I've been so busy." His daughter smiled and asked, "Are you going to play with me today?" David smiled through his tears. He said, "Yes, today I'm staying home." They hugged. For David, it was a small decision, but it was the beginning of something important. Grace faced another challenge. Her teenage son had started getting into trouble at school. One evening, her son came home angry. He said, "You don't understand me." Grace became upset. She wanted to shout, but then she remembered her own father, Michael. She remembered how he had listened to her when she was afraid to leave home. Grace took a breath. Instead of shouting, she sat down. She said, "Tell me what's really happening." Her son began to cry. He said, "I'm scared I'm going to fail." Grace pulled him into her arms. She said, "You don't have to be perfect to make me proud." Emma visited her mother, Sarah. They sat together drinking tea. Emma looked troubled. She asked, "Mom, do you ever think about Grandpa?" Sarah smiled and said, "Sometimes." Emma asked, "Do you still miss the father you never had?" Sarah became quiet. Then she answered honestly. She said, "Yes, sometimes I do." Emma looked surprised. Sarah said, "Healing doesn't mean you forget the pain." She took Emma's hand and said, "It means the pain no longer controls your life." Emma nodded. That weekend, the entire family gathered again. Daniel was now a grandfather. Michael was surrounded by grandchildren. Sarah watched her children and grandchildren laughing together. Daniel looked around the table. There were no empty chairs. Every chair was occupied. He smiled. Daniel asked, "Do you remember when we were children?" Michael laughed and said, "How could I forget?" Sarah looked at the children and said, "We thought our story had already been written." Daniel shook his head and said, "But it wasn't." Daniel looked at his children. He said, "I spent many years trying to be the perfect father." David looked at him. Daniel said, "But I learned something." Everyone became quiet. Daniel said, "Children don't need perfect parents." He looked at his grandchildren and said, "They need parents who listen, parents who apologize, parents who show up, and parents who keep choosing them." After dinner, Daniel walked into the old room. The chair from his childhood was still there. He sat down. For a moment he closed his eyes. He remembered the little boy he had once been. Then his granddaughter walked into the room. She asked, "Grandpa, what are you doing?" Daniel smiled and said, "Thinking about how far our family has come." She took his hand. She said, "Come outside. Everyone is waiting." Daniel stood up. He looked at the chair one last time. Then he walked away. Outside, the family gathered under the evening sky. Children were playing. Parents were talking. Grandparents were laughing. Daniel looked at them all. He finally understood. His childhood had started with an empty chair, but his future was filled with people who loved one another. The past could not be changed, but the future had been changed. Daniel gathered the younger generation around him. He said, "Listen to me carefully." Daniel said, "If you ever have children, don't promise them a perfect life." He smiled and said, "Promise them that when life becomes difficult, you will stay." Everyone became quiet. Daniel said, "Because sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give a child is simply this." He paused. Then Daniel said, "I'm here." The camera slowly moves away from the family. 3 generations stand together. The children laugh. The parents embrace them. The grandparents watch proudly. And inside the old house, the chair that once represented loneliness now represents something different.